Sometimes I feel like I want to fly without no wings. I elevate.
Welcome to another episode of the Sober Cold Bear podcast. And I'm grateful to have Dr. Jeff Reynolds joining the pod. Jeff, thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for having me on, Matt. I really appreciate it. We're going to have an awesome conversation.
Yeah, no, for sure. So just for everybody, we'll get into Jeff and we'll talk about Jeff's background and who he is. And he's an incredible human being. I actually got connected to Jeff from another person that's been on the podcast, my good friend Jason Mayo. We connected and, we're here. We're going to be talking about a very interesting topic today. Before we do that, I'm going to go through my quick spiel. The Sober Cold Bear podcast, as everybody knows, is a podcast about a number of topics: sobriety, addiction, recovery, mental health, depression, eating disorders, entrepreneurship, business, all sorts of crazy things that are out in the world. There's constantly things that are getting thrown at us, at you. And the reason why I started the Sober Cold Bear podcast is to bring light topics and a really, good subjects to discuss of what's, what we all go through in our daily lives. I am an addict, as everybody knows. I am an alcoholic and I am an addict. I am working a 12-step program. I am in AA. I have a sponsor. I've worked the 12 steps. But what I also say is, if you do think that you have a problem, you probably do have a problem. There are ways to handle that problem. You can go to AA. You can get a sponsor. You can work the 12 steps. If you really think that you need extra help, then ask for help and go to rehab. I probably should have gone to rehab a number of different times. Didn't do it, but it is what it is. I actually turned out okay now that I'm on the other side of it. But, it's a struggle. It's a lifelong struggle that we're constantly dealing with. And if you do need help, it's okay to ask for help. Just, ask a loved one, reach out to me on Instagram or YouTube or what have you. Or reach out to Jeff and, it's a lifelong thing, but you don't have to do it alone. So today's topic, before I introduce you, Jeff, is about being a parent and more specifically having a child in addiction and what to do about that. And we're going to talk all about that today. But before we do that, Jeff, again, thank you for being here. Jeff Reynolds is an entrepreneur. He is a thought leader. He is a speaker and advocate. He is also an author. He's an Ironman triathlete. We'll probably talk a little bit about that when you get into your story. He is also a 2-time cancer survivor, and he's written a really great book called Every Mile Matters. It's basically his story about what it is about, cancer and overcoming cancer and what you've done and kind of the lessons and tribulations of all that. Did I pretty much describe that reasonably okay, Jeff, or did I miss anything?
Yeah, no, I think you did I think you did a great job. And, most germane to this conversation, I've worked in health and human services for more years than I care to admit, 30 plus, and now have the privilege of running one of Long Island's oldest and largest not-for-profit organizations. And as part of our programs, we run 60 some odd programs. We run 2 outpatient treatment centers, 3 recovery centers, which are not treatment, but that host a lot of the 12-step programs that you talked about at the outset. And then we have some recovery coaching programs and things designed to fill in the gaps, including a pretty robust harm reduction outreach program.
Now, walk us through kind of the organization and how long you've been with it. Obviously, I did do some background. I know that you previously have held, roles at the Long Island Council on Alcoholism and Drug Dependency, but maybe talk a little bit about the current organization that you're affiliated with, the name, and a little bit more deeply around that.
Sure. It's called Family and Children's Association. It's been around for 141 years. As you can tell from my youthful appearance, I haven't been there the entire time, although sometimes it feels like it. We started as really a one-room orphanage founded by the Schuyler sisters in Nassau County before Nassau was a county. And it was basically kids who came out from New York City that needed a home. And so, whatever images you conjure up around Dickens, it was the time. It was the late 1800s. Since then, the organization has continued to thrive, gone through, since the late 1800s, a couple world wars, the Depression, a couple recessions here and there, 9/11, Sandy, you name it. COVID. And at this point in time, we run more than 60 programs that run the lifespan, including a nursery school in the village of Hempstead, which is a disadvantaged community here outside of New York City, and then senior programs. We serve about 36,000 people a year. We've got 360 staff across 13 locations in Nassau and Suffolk counties. And so I feel privileged. And the way I look at it is the board of directors has given me the opportunity to carry this organization through this phase of its lifestyle. And in doing so, I get to oversee staff and volunteers that are really, really making a significant difference in the community. And so, lots of my time is spent doing, business type things, what it takes
Sure.
to run a $28 million organization. But I still get the most joy and satisfaction from interfacing with the people we serve, either informally or formally. I don't tell our board of directors this, Matt, but I would do this job for free. Honestly, I feel like I get more than I give. And,
Yeah.
there's an old adage that says, if you love what you do, then you don't work a day in your life. And although it sounds trite, it feels true most days.
Well said. And the programs that are supported through the organization include pretty much everything that I would imagine, right? So addiction and recovery resources, substance abuse services, mental health services. I would think parental support and youth
Yeah.
services and things like that. Does it pretty much cover like the entire gamut of
The
all those
entire gamut.
programs? Oh,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
amazing.
So a lot of the things you mentioned, a whole suite of senior programs. We
Hmm.
also run the only home in Nassau County for runaway, homeless, and trafficked youth. And so we do a lot
Wow.
around kids. You mentioned parental education. We run a program called PACT, which is for new moms who are generally younger, who are not only looking to prevent subsequent unintended pregnancies, but looking to boost their parenting skills and that kind of thing. And so one of the beautiful things about FCA is we run so many programs. I hate when we have to refer somebody out because it means that person has to go between organizations to get their needs met. They have to tell their story to 5 different people. They have to pick up the phone and say, "Hey, I need help yet again." And so the one-stop shopping approach to health and human services really is a benefit. And there are some services that we don't do because other people have got it and manage it well. But I've always been a little bit frustrated about the fact that if you need mental health services, you go to one agency. If you need substance abuse services, you go to another. If you need housing, there's yet a third agency. God forbid you need food or
You
childcare.
guys pretty much cover it all.
Yeah, yeah. So we cover those things. So folks aren't bouncing between organizations and having to tell their story, 10 different times and, take buses and get rides to come to appointments.
Do you guys operate any of the AA programs out of FCA as well? Do folks have meetings there? Do parents meet there?
Yeah. So we host
Do
pretty much every 12-step meeting you can imagine,
okay. Yeah,
even
I
some
would
you
think so.
probably never heard of.
Yeah.
So yeah, the latest thing has been, the huge upswing in problem gambling among young men. And when I say young men, I mean ages 13 to 18. We've seen a huge upswing. And so our GA groups have really taken off in some of our locations. But yeah, look, we're a big believer in that there's no wrong door and there's no one single path for everybody into recovery. And you've got to find out what works for you. And so we host 12-step programs. We do smart recovery. We do refuge recovery, a little bit of everything to make sure that there's something regardless of the path you want to take.
Yeah, and as you and I discussed, Jeff, the cross addiction aspect of, any, 12-step program is usually, there's crossover, especially, because, the way that addiction happens and the way that, dopamine is released and all the fun things that, your brain does to you when you're using some type of substance or social media or, you know, gambling or, eating disorder, they all release the same thing. They all have the same impacts.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think it's just fantastic that you have everything in kind of one place, almost kind of like a one-stop shop for, everything. And it's pretty amazing that you're able to have access to all these resources. I want to kind of get into the topic since, obviously you're dealing with this all day long on this topic and that is around, addiction and being a parent and having either in recovery or being, working a 12-step program, but also more specifically, having a child that is actually struggling with, some type of, addiction, whether it's substances or alcohol or drugs or an eating disorder or, what have you. I have a lot of friends in the program that have children that are either still out, going through it. I have friends that have kids that are in the rooms and have gone through rehab. I also have friends that have lost children to addiction. So I can see, the full spectrum of what this fucking stupid disease, this crazy disease can do,
Yep.
not just to a person, but to families. So give me kind of your perspective on kind of how you think we're doing in America right about now around programs, around helping families around addiction, around helping parents with children in addiction. And we'll start getting into I have some specific questions, but let's kind of start more broadly and then we'll start to kind of narrow it down.
Yeah. So to answer your question about how we're doing, in one word, I would say lousy. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. And when we talk about the spectrum, I think it begins with kids that are at risk. And right. And one of the things we know about addiction is that there's a genetic component to that. We know that kids born to parents that have struggled with addiction or grandparents that have addiction, and sometimes great grandparents who have struggled with addiction are infinitely more likely to develop an addiction themselves. Some of that is genetics, some of it is upbringing and the social environment. It's any number of things, but we know that those kids are at higher risk. When we look at kind of primary prevention, right? So what is it we say to kids early on? Right? We're going to talk about kids that are in there, from 15 to 25 that are struggling, but there's a whole bunch of years that occur before the age of 15. And one of the big shortcomings in the system when it comes to supporting parents is that we don't have open and honest conversations with parents as to how
Hmm.
to talk to your kids about substances before it becomes an issue. Part of that lies in our schools, right? So the notion of drug education in schools is generally you put, when the kids are 13 and 14 and you're separating the boys and girls for conversations around puberty, you throw in a little bit about drugs and you bring in a guy like me who says if you use heroin, if you use cannabis today, you're going to be shooting dope tomorrow and your life is going to be destroyed and it'll never be the same and you're going to disappoint your parents. And we do that once a year. Really, the way we should be doing this is we should be starting these conversations with kids and parents long before those kids are even in elementary school. One of the things, and I recall it vividly, I have one son who's older, but two that are a little bit younger. They're 15 and 19. And I remember speaking to a primary care doctor friend of mine. We're both really smart guys. We both had toddlers at the time. And he's like, nobody tells you how to do this.
No,
And we're really smart
there's
people. And
books, but they don't tell, but you still, that books
there's
are
no
fucking
handbook.
meaningless.
You don't know what's right. You wind up going by gut, right? Which is not necessarily a
Sure.
bad thing,
Yeah.
but you never think to have the conversation about drugs and alcohol generally until it becomes a factor and your kid wants to go to a party or they come home wrecked, right? If instead we talk to parents and situated drug and alcohol use along a whole range of household dangers, if
Mm.
we situated feelings and emotions along a continuum and taught kids how to describe them earlier on in the game, we would be so much further ahead. One of the central tenets of drug prevention has been that kids use drugs when they're bored or they hang out with the wrong crowd. And for some kids, that's true. In fact, for a lot of kids, that's true. What's different is that if kids use drugs for the first time because they're bored, because they're hanging out with their boys and want to fit in, some of those kids will use drugs or alcohol and say, all right, this was cool. Until next time we hang out, I'm good. There are other kids that will say, holy crap, for the first time in my life, I feel normal.
Oh
Like,
yeah.
I feel like I fit in. I'm not
Hmm.
anxious. I'm not nervous. Wow, I can
Hmm.
actually sleep.
I can talk to girls. I can talk to boys.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I,
Yeah.
those are the kids that I worry about the most, right? The kids that are doing it out of boredom, odds are, assuming nothing bad happens to them, they're going to grow out of it. It's those kids that use that substance for the first time who are like, oh, I feel a whole bunch of things that I never felt before.
Sure. Sure. I want to get into drug prevention in schools in a little bit. But before we do that, because I mean, it's funny. There are a number of organizations out there. I actually had a guy on the podcast that has an organization called Live 18, and they basically go around and talk to schools, not about necessarily drugs and alcohol and using drugs and alcohol and why it's bad and the problems that can come from it, but I actually talk more. Sorry, it's not Live 18, it's Vive 18. My apologies. They talk more about like, vaping and drugs and alcohol, but then they also have programs that they leave behind for schools that allow kids to set up sobriety programs, sober programs, kids that just don't want to drink or use, but you can still have parties. They do it at college campuses, things like that. So we'll talk about that in a moment. I have 2 kids. My son is 19. My daughter is 15, almost 16. I originally got sober and got into, a recovery program into AA back in 2021. And my wife and I have always been very open and transparent with our kids about drugs and about alcohol, certainly open and transparent in terms of like me and my program, and open and transparent in terms of like why I'm doing these things, why I go to a 12-step program, why I go to AA, what have you. But in addition to that, we do have very open conversations about alcohol and about drugs, because I think, if you're a parent, you can only do certain things when the kid's in the house. Once that kid leaves and walks out that door and goes to a party, gets behind the wheel, it goes to a school dance, is on a college campus, you're not there to tell them when somebody puts out a white line or gives you a pill and says this will make you feel better. You're not there to say to them, hey, there might be fentanyl in that. Or, hey, you might be taking something that when you add alcohol to that, like you might die. And so we constantly have very open conversations about like, here are the things that you need to be aware of. Here are the things that you need to spot for. And here's the judgment that you're going to need to make when you run into that situation. Because for fuck's sake, you are going to do that. You are going to run into that. It's going to happen to you. Somebody's going to have cocaine at a party. Somebody's going to have a pill. They're going to say, take this Oxy. It's going to make you feel great. Drink some alcohol with it. You have to have the self-awareness and the judgment to say, maybe this is not a good idea. And so you hope that the things that you talk about with your kids and the repetitiveness of what you're saying to your children, which is what we do, will work, right? Obviously, it doesn't work for all. Jason was telling me that he went and spoke in DC, and he was on a panel with a woman that had 3 children that all died to drug overdose. 3. So, you can only, as a parent, I would imagine, and again, I'm going long-winded on this, I think transparency is really important. I think being open with your kids and honest with your kids about like what to spot, and good judgment, and being open and honest. I think those are very, very important for a parent. Do you talk about those things, with parents that come into your program? Is that something that you advocate for? Let's dive into that first, and then we'll go back into kind of the schools and what we think schools can do better.
Yeah. I mean, let me take it. I think you're right. Right. The honest, open conversations are important. There's another component though. And this is the part that, parents and everybody else in the lives of kids have to emphasize. There are skills and competencies that we can give our kids that will equip them to deal with any number of challenges that come down the pike. Right. As the father of a daughter, I was incessantly concerned about sexual assault. As the dad of a young boy, I was incredibly concerned about bullying. And so if we teach our kids to be very clear in their boundaries, to have the communication skills to say, this doesn't feel right, the answer is no, then we equip them. I don't have to say fentanyl will kill you, although I do. What I have to say is that's not what you stand for, right? You make your own decisions. You don't have to go along with the crowd. If something feels right, you're not going to do it. And if you're unsure as to what to do, as you likely will be, because even as adults, we sometimes are unsure, you're going to come and talk to one of your parents. Or if you don't want to talk to parents, you're going to find some other adult you trust, and you're going to have a conversation with that person, right? So here's what we stand for. Here's how you set your personal boundaries. Here's how you communicate them. And if that doesn't work, you're going to come to us. But I'm also going to encourage you to come up with a plan in case you don't want to come and talk to dad about some guy who's pressuring you, right? Because then dad might address it on his own. And so doing that contingency planning and giving giving all children those core competencies up front actually equips them beyond simply saying, look, fentanyl is dangerous. It might kill you.
The
You could
tool.
get a
You're basically
bad
saying
batch of,
the
right.
toolkit.
Right. So you give them those tools up front. I'll give you another example. I have a son that has a severe peanut allergy. And so he
Mhm.
carries an EpiPen. And we've made a couple
Sure.
trips as a family to the emergency room, not in many, many years. But I taught him early on, you can't come in contact with nuts. If the rest of your friends are eating Snicker bars, guess what? You got a bolt, right? Because some of this is airborne. You obviously can't eat Snicker bars. So he became very clear about his dietary restrictions and such, and setting that boundary with kids. And look, kids don't fully get it. So they'll joke about his allergy and that kind of thing when he was younger. I also said to him, you need to know that your grandmother died of chronic alcoholism. You need to know that her parents both struggled with alcoholism. So we've identified a nut allergy, but guess what? You have another one, right? And there are things that other kids can eat Snicker bars. Other people, when they get older, might be able to consume alcohol. Guess what? For our family, that's a really tricky
So
proposition.
addiction runs in your family as it
It
is.
does.
Are you sober, Jeff?
I'm not.
You're not.
I'm
Okay.
not.
By the way, no judgment. I'm just asking in general because you
Yeah.
said like my grandma. I know a lot of people are on this program that are not sober. They're normies and they
Yeah. Yeah.
beer every now and again, like whatever. No, I just was curious because you'd said usually when they bring that up, that's because maybe they're also possibly in the program as well. But okay,
Well,
please
so
continue.
look, not in the program, but I'm keenly aware of my risk factors
Fuck yeah,
and and
absolutely,
any number of them
yeah,
that are not limited to parental involvement. And so I stay aware
sure.
of those things when it comes to any number of issues. But my son's allergy gave me the ability to have a conversation in a different way. As a family, we had to adapt to that. And it was pretty easy to say, guess what? We got another allergy you don't know about, right? That traces back to family. But I think, look, talking with kids when they're 4, 5, 6, 7 about
Too hard.
peer pressure, about bullying and stuff like that, that sets them up to have a more age appropriate conversation when they get a little bit older.
I think it's still young at the 4, 5, 6, 7 range. I think there's ways of doing it kind of indirectly.
Yes.
And but I mean, I think the way you're describing it is terrific. I want to ask you quick. So when parents come up to you and just say, "Hey, I'm really struggling here. I've got a kid. He struggles with smoking pot, smoking marijuana, or my kid drinks a lot, or my kid's into cocaine, or what have you. And it's gotten to a point where it's become unmanageable and the parents kind of running out of options. As hard as those conversations are, you're in such a great position of providing hope to these parents.
Yeah.
So what do you usually what's kind of your simple playbook? Because, somebody's going to see this and they're going to have either a child that's struggling, or they're going to maybe be in a situation where they have another family member and they have this advice. So like kind of what's your simple kind of go-to playbook that you like to give advice, etc., whether it's taking from the programs that you operate at the FCA or what have you? I'd love to hear your insights around that.
I'll give you a couple highlights. One of the things I almost immediately ask parents is whether or not their kid has been assessed in a thorough kind of way. And they'll say, well, he went to a therapist, a few years ago, but that didn't really work out. He stopped going.
I mean, for either mental disorders or a learning disability or what have you, is that what you mean by assessed?
Yes. So
Okay.
so generally what happens is a kid gets jammed up, the school performance begins to fail, there's acting out at home, there's signs of substance use, maybe even direct evidence of substance use.
Mm-hmm.
Parent typically goes online, Googles a social worker, finds a local 25-year-old social worker who hung a shingle around the block, bring them to that person. The kid sits through some sessions with the young therapist because she's pretty. Lo and behold, 6 weeks later, they got nothing to show for it. The kid decides he doesn't want to go anymore, and the family is back at square one. One of the things I say to families is you've got to get a comprehensive assessment about those learning disabilities, around mental health conditions. We always talk, and it's a mistake, but we talk about vaping and tobacco and weed and booze as being gateways into bigger and badder things. Those things are bad enough, but those aren't the gateways. The gateways are untreated anxiety, depression, and other mental health conditions that could be treated or addressed in another setting, and they're not. So I always say to families, look, get a complete assessment. Second thing I say to families is the school is not your enemy. I see so many families, and I've had probably a dozen phone calls this year where the family calls me and says, I want you to help me find a lawyer. Okay, why do you need a lawyer? Well, I need a lawyer because the school district threw my kid out of school. And what I tell them is take the money you would spend on a lawyer and go buy your kid good treatment. Then we'll talk to the school district. And so the school is not necessarily your enemy in all of this. And if we're going to keep our kids healthy in an increasingly chaotic environment, you need all hands on deck. And so you need those teachers, those guidance counselors, those clergy, if that's a part of your life, every single family member engaged and pulling in the same direction. I also encourage parents to be honest and open with their kids. When you
Yeah,
make
yeah, for sure.
mistakes in the way you manage your kids, it's okay to say. I hear so many folks that do have clinical degrees say you got to do tough love. You got to cut them off. You got to drop the hammer down. Generally, we take a different approach to that. It's got to be a more informed and nuanced approach
Yep.
to support that kid, not to
Yep.
support their substance use, but to support their struggle. Because most of these kids, the amount, and I deal with kids a fair amount, the amount of guilt these kids experience as a result of disappointing their parents is like nothing else. And so we're taking kids that are anxious or they're depressed, they find a solution to that. That solution is not to the parent's liking and indeed has some negative consequences. That parent comes down on that kid. That kid feels guiltier than ever before,
I
right?
think I think to that point, it's a good one because I constantly think about it, and that is, if you have a child that's struggling, is whether it's drugs or alcohol, some type of addiction. And by the way, we haven't even talked about social media and just how fucking terrible it is
Yeah, yeah.
out there. And you know, a lot of these kids, they go through, they get the help. Some kids go to rehab or whatever, but oftentimes there aren't the resources for the parents in terms of what they actually need to adapt, right? So it's like, and so the best programs that I've always found that work really, really well are the ones that actually get the person well, healthy, what have you, mentally, physically, spiritually, whether it's rehab or an AA program. But on the other hand, you have to educate everybody that's around that person because they have to adapt too. A lot
Yeah.
of people go to rehab and they come home and there hasn't been any education for that family on like what to expect when they come home. How are they going to change? What do you need to do? So I think the best programs are the ones that offer both assistance to the person that is actually dealing with the problem, and then also programs that are offered to those that are supportive to that individual that needs that help. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So, Matt, I think you nailed it. I would actually go a step further. And that if you're running an adolescent program these days and not not offer, requiring the family to participate, you're doing that family a disservice. I'll never forget. There was a father once who said to me, look, he's the screw up. Why do I have to go sit in therapy now? Are you kidding me? I have to go do this. He's disrupted my life for 3 years. He finally goes to care. No, I have to go sit in front of this woman and talk about my problems. And I turned to him and I said, 5 minutes ago, you told me that you would do anything to save your son. Were you lying? Right? This is not a lot to ask. And look,
Oh man, I can't even imagine the conversations that you have that you could write a book about, I'm sure.
100. And look, I grew up in a very chaotic household, and I fully understand that my brother and I adapted to those behaviors in maladaptive kind of ways.
Mm,
And so once my mother passed away, I had a ton of work that I needed to do after the fact in order to have normal, healthy relationships. And so when you live in
yeah.
that kind of chaotic environment, you're on the merry-go-round, you adapt to that craziness, right? That's part of the
Yeah,
deal.
it's so
That's the
interesting.
only way you survive. Well, guess what? If that kid comes out of treatment and comes back home, you're still in that first place. You're still, sneaking into their room and looking at that place where they used to hide their weed. You're still keeping secrets. You're still keeping.
Exactly. Yeah, there's a they and or something happens at home and they think that person's going to blow up like they did before,
Right.
and so they have this they have to be deprogrammed as much as the actual individual that's getting that help needs to be deprogrammed as well. I was going to say another thing that I think is that was reminded of I was reminded of, and I completely forgot the point. But, I think for a parent, a lot of parents oftentimes, at least that I hear about, thank God I haven't had to go through it just yet. I may have to, who knows? But I think there's just this kind of like realization of almost this kind of accountability that needs to happen on the parent. I think oftentimes they're like, my kid's the problem. They need to get fixed up. Like, I'm fine versus like, we need to completely reconfigure our lives. It isn't just about making my kid well. It's about completely reprogramming myself.
Yeah.
And it's the
and our
full
family.
picture and
And our
everything,
family, the way we
the
function, the
whole
way we
fucking,
communicate, the
yeah,
way we talk, right?
the
You
whole
almost have to
picture,
start over.
the whole menu. You have to completely rewrite the entire menu from scratch. And it's having that super, like, candid, honest conversation that everything that you thought used to be is going to be no longer. It's going to be completely new. It's going to be completely different. And you need to come to that reality check. So I'm sure you've had, many, many, many reality checks with these parents. You're like, you need to get your head into this because it's going to be just as much you as it is them. They're going to be putting in a lot of work. You're going to be putting in a lot of work. And if you're not willing to do that, then you just need to realize that this may not work. It may not go as well as you hope. You can always hope, but hope isn't a strategy, in my opinion. You have to fully immerse yourself into it. Otherwise, it's not going to.
Matt, you'll get a kick out of this. The number one question I get from parents when they have a kid coming home from rehab is it still okay to have a drink with dinner? I'm like, that's like where we are.
Are you fucking
Right?
kidding me?
We got a whole ton of work that we need to do. The other
What's your
thing,
response? Please tell me, like, your typical response to that.
generally, it's genuine surprise, although I've heard it 1,000 times. It's like, this is the conversation we're having out of the gate. And then I break into a familiar refrain about creating an environment that's conducive to success and conducive to your kid being successful. And again, look, you told me you were willing to do anything to fix your family. It shouldn't be that big of a sacrifice to take a pass on drinking wine on the night your kid comes back home from rehab.
Oh, 100%. I think it's, look, come on, let's be really smart here, right? Maybe down the road after things are like getting back to normal and like everything's cool. Like, sure. You like, if you want to go out to a restaurant and have a drink of wine, I go out with my family all the time. I go out with my in-laws and my family, my extended family, and they drink and they do shots of tequila. It doesn't bother me. But again, it's kind of like you guys need to understand that there's a big, big piece of self-awareness here.
Yes.
And you need to be thinking about the big holistic picture of what you're trying to do. Your kid's just coming home. Why would you even think about doing like that?
Right. Why would it be on the table?
Why would it even be on the table?
Here's the other thing I get from dads, and this is, generally for dads of teenagers and moms to a certain extent too, especially in this wine culture world. They will say, look, I think I choose to give my kid alcohol. I don't think it's the end of the world. I would rather they do it under my roof than somewhere else. And I can lecture them about the dangers of alcohol use and how it's, quite frankly, even deadlier than fentanyl is, because it kills more Americans than fentanyl. And I can talk about the double message that those parents are sending. But the way I get through to dads is I say to them, look, do you feel the same way about sex? And I say, well, what do you mean? Would you let your daughter have sex with a guy under your roof? Oh, no, not in a million years. And they get pissed off. Well, how come? Well, because it's disrespectful and having sex comes with responsibility and she could get pregnant and she's got to make an informed choice. All the same.
And why is that any different from alcohol?
It's all the same kind of
it's
thing.
All the same.
And you could almost see like a light bulb go off. And so you have parents these days that are, quite frankly, more interested in being their kids' friends than parents. And I say to them, and they rave about social media and alcohol advertising and the bad kids at school. And I'm like, wait a minute. Right now, here today, you have more power over your kids than anybody else or anything. Friggin' use it. Because one day you won't have it. It won't be the same. Now is the time to use it.
Yeah. And I think to that point, the actual taking a drink or a drug isn't the actual problem. It's the actual character defects. And it's also, I would think, having that very difficult conversation with the parent that says you're going to need to probably react differently in situations that you used to get really pissed off and angry, because those are going to be triggers for your kids. especially when they come back home. If you get angry about, like, you know, a touchdown, or you get angry because the dog pissed on the rug, like, you need to think twice before you get angry, because those things are what led up to a lot of the triggers for your kids. Not directly, not to give you a guilt trip for yelling at the dog. We all yell at the dog, but my point is, like, you need to modify your behavior. You need to modify about what you do, how you do it, what you say, how you say it, what the reaction's going to be, what the look's going to be. It has to be a complete restart. You have to completely turn off the computer and hit reboot. It's a reboot. And you can't explain this. I mean, look, I'm not an expert in this shit. You clearly, you are. But I am in the program. And I certainly feel like I'm an expert enough to be able to talk about this and have a meaningful conversation. Otherwise, we wouldn't be talking today about this.
Amen.
Right? So, you know, is what I just said like a reasonably good, like, it's not just about, like, I think it's kind of connecting the dots with, it's not just about the drugs and alcohol. It's the character defects that lead you to drink, that lead you to use, and that you need to get in touch with as part of the overall recovery.
I think that's exactly on point. I think there's a progression with most drug and alcohol use that doesn't start with the first drink or the first pill, you know, the first potion. It starts with a set of behaviors, right? And as we talk about
100%.
reoccurrences, there's a set of behaviors and predictors that kind of lead you down that particular road. I think the other thing you said that's important, I always encourage parents and teach them how to have conversations. And sometimes parents will say, no, tell me exactly what to say. And I will respond to them and say, I suppose I could do that and I could give you a framework. But what you do is more important than what you say. And so parents who, you know, their thing, who process feelings in a way that might be unhealthy, whether that's with food or drink or another substance, and say to their kids, but don't you do it, are setting up a dynamic where they're at odds with their kids perpetually, and you lose some of that influence you might naturally have. I'll never forget 10 years ago, I was involved in a family intervention. We're trying to get this kid to go off to treatment. The kid's smoking weed on a daily basis. And the kid's like, Dad, you smoked weed with me. How come you're not going to treatment?
Unbelievable.
And of course, mom is like, you why? You know, talk about, you know, a wild reaction, right? And I said to Dad,
I've heard of so many stories in AA where, you know, parents actually introduce their kids to drugs. There's a person I know in AA where their parents taught the dad taught this person how to shoot up.
Right. What's the harm? It's not a big deal. You're doing it with me. That's safer than you doing it on the street. Everyone's going to use drugs and alcohol.
I mean, we could go on. Yeah, no, it's crazy. I want to get through a couple more things before we finish up here. And Jeff, this has been like a fantastic conversation. Yeah. So let's keep going here. I want to talk a little bit about trauma, because I think trauma is a very important component to recovery. It's a very important to why addiction happens, whether you're inherently getting it through, you know, your genes, DNA, or you had some really shitty fucking trauma, you know, a rape, you know, you were molested as a child, like that shit runs deep. So how often are you guys pulling into your programs at FCA, bringing trauma into the conversation, identifying why trauma is such an important piece? We could certainly kind of blend in codependency as part of this, because I think codependency is another really, really big deal that's connected directly to trauma. But let's talk about that for just a little bit.
I think trauma used to be, we've come a long way in addiction care, and it used to be that co-occurring disorders, right? A mental health condition running parallel or alongside an addiction was, you know, 20% of folks have co-occurring disorders. No, it's 100%. Let's be real. Let's be honest. And we used to talk about specialized trauma tracks for treatment and that kind of thing. And, you know, increasingly trauma is the norm, and trauma doesn't have to be a sexual assault. It doesn't have to be a molestation by an uncle. Trauma in some cases can be the community in which you live. So we do a lot of work in the village of Hempstead. Graduation rate 10 years ago was about half of the kids. Gang violence, a regular basis, not uncommon. When I'm there, that you'll hear gunshots, big police and ICE presence these days, that kind of thing. That's trauma.
Oh yeah.
There are kids who are bullied, you know, the first day of seventh grade, if not sooner.
I was
trauma.
That's my that's a lot of the basis of my addiction that I've
Yeah.
had to really go into, is the trauma, is the bullying that I received since I was really a first grader, because that shit runs deep. I mean, when you go, 6, 7, 8, 9 years of constant belittlement by other kids are cruel, and that stuff adds up. And it's layers and layers and layers of scars.
Yeah, and so look, trauma is defined in a number of ways. I'll never forget 20 years ago I did it. I took an ACEs training, right? And so ACEs are adverse childhood experiences. They could be anything from, parental divorce, parental death,
Mm-hmm.
any number of things. And I remember kind of we all as helping professionals scored our own tests, and mine was off the charts. And I'm like, wait a minute, nobody molested me.
Isn't that that's the 8 or 9 questions that you
Yeah,
answer, the ACEs?
yeah. And I went through and right, CPS involvement, that kind of thing. And I went through the list and I'm like, oh my God. And I was almost
Yeah. Oh
embarrassed
yeah.
when they went around and said, all right, what'd you get? Like most people
I
had
took it. I obviously passed
right.
with flying colors, but I didn't need to take it. I knew, I knew that, the trauma was the bottom line.
So look, it's got to be at the foundation of everything we do. Kids suffer varying degrees of trauma, but I'd say we exist in an environment where, the level of trauma that we experience is actually pretty high. Look, a month ago, we saw the murder of a public figure with blood gushing out of his neck, right? We all got exposed to that. I still think about it, right? I have my own political views. I thought about someone sitting there being shot and blood gushing out of his neck because I saw the video on TikTok, right? So we're exposed to traumatic experiences. 20
And
years
because it
ago, we
was on,
couldn't see that.
because it was on TikTok, and still on TikTok and Instagram and all the social media, everybody's seeing it. Kids are seeing it. It's just everybody's exposed to it. There are no secrets. It's out there, and it's available, and trauma comes in many forms. And you're right.
When parents say to me, and I'll recommend limiting social media consumption, right? And I say to parents, look, if you're at the dinner table on your phone and you ask your kid not to be on social media, you're just begging to be called a hypocrite. And they're gonna do what you do, not what you say. But when parents are like, is it really that bad? I say to them, have you been on TikTok? They'll say, yeah, of course I've been on TikTok. All right, if TikTok were a physical place, would you allow your child to go there by themselves?
That's well
Well,
said.
no, right? It would be like the weirdest carnival in the world. It'd be like, a crazy place of circus clowns. But you never let your kid go there. Yet we do that for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 hours a day. And then wonder why our
That's a
kids
really great that's a really great analogy that I want to repeat, because I think it's really important. What you said was, actually, would you say it just one more time, please?
if TikTok were a physical place, would you allow your kids to go there by themselves?
If TikTok was a fair, or
Right, right.
a place
Or a
that
carnival,
you could
right,
go to, a carnival. If TikTok
right,
was a carnival, would you allow your kids to go there
right.
based off of what they see, what they experience, who they talk to, pictures,
And how
you
they
name it?
feel,
Oh,
right?
and how they feel. Oh, God, that's some powerful shit. So one last kind of area before we, I mean, again, we could spend a ton of time around trauma, but I
Yeah,
think that was really helpful. I'm pleased to hear that, you incorporate that. It
yeah,
seems like all across every program that you do, it's an open conversation, that trauma is connected to all of it. You
yes.
bring it into the conversation with the kid that's struggling. You bring it into the conversation with the parent, with the extended families. I mean, it's got to be a full circle type of conversation, and I love that. And I'm really happy about that. It's funny. I wish we would talk about trauma more in AA meetings. I don't feel like we do. If there's one thing that I don't like about the big book, despite there's great things in the big book, tons, but there's not a lot of steps as it relates to, kind of modern day shit that we all talk about,
Yeah.
like trauma, like codependency, like this other stuff. I wish there were modifications, but anyways, that's just my own opinion. Kind of the last area that I want to talk about is, I still feel, and this is just me personally, I still feel in this modern day age of social media, TikTok, again, I still think that fair analogy is perfect. I feel like schools still aren't doing a good job bringing recovery education, trauma education, addiction and recovery education, transparency into the schools. In fact, I can tell you firsthand that I have reached out to some of the schools in my community, and I've asked, point blank, I would love to come and speak to these kids. And it's like, no, we don't cover that here.
Yes.
And you'd think, they're starting to do things like, no phone policy. You can't bring your phone out at school. Why isn't this a part of the conversation?
I wish it were. Things were getting better leading into COVID, and then COVID, just everything went to hell. Any progress we were making just went out the door. One of the struggles I have is that, and I've actually advocated this here in New York State, is that we should report out when there are fatalities in schools. Because one of the things that school superintendents consistently say to me is, look, we have so much we have to pack into the day. There's only so much time. The kids have standardized tests coming up. They really need to focus on that. And for years, I've shouted back at them and said, kids that are drunk, high or dead of overdoses don't do well on standardized tests.
Or going on their phones every break to go look at TikTok.
Right. We need to focus on building those core competencies that are more important than the math you're going to teach them that they're never going to use in 1,000 years, right?
The life lessons.
Right. They spend a huge amount of time teaching kids skills that are not beneficial in modern day life, and they short shrift the other stuff as being soft. And so the parents think the schools are doing it. The schools think the parents are doing it. The community isn't involved in it because it's too controversial. And these kids wind up without the support and guidance they need in order to be not only successful, but to stay alive.
And who suffers? The kids.
Right. Right.
Why do you think administrations, superintendents, principals, counselors, teachers, why do you think there's so much fear still?
I think some of it, and look, and this is just a theory. So there's two things.
Again, your opinion.
Here's the safe answer I can give you. Some of the stuff we talk about.
You don't have to give me a safe answer. This is.
Let me give you the safe answer first, then I'll give you the real one. So the safe answer is that they're scared to death of parents who are going to complain. You talk to my kids about drug and alcohol. My kids don't use drugs and alcohol. This is not a thing. You talked about maybe their families using drugs and alcohol. We're not that kind of family. I'm offended, right?
Well, they're afraid. They're afraid by doing that they're going to get sued by the parents or their job.
Right. Or their parents are going to show up at a school board meeting and complain and say, this is not your job. I'll raise my own kids. You worry about the other stuff.
So it's the insecurity aspect of like how the parents are going to react to the administration doing certain things. Got it. Okay.
Right. So that's the safe answer. Here's the thing.
That's safe.
We all, whether we run not-for-profit organizations, whether we're teachers or school administrators, have our own biases and stigma related to addiction. For most people, right, unless you've studied addiction, the way you learn about it is through personal experience, which is generally not a fun ride, right? Or you read about addiction on the news. What do you read about addiction on the news? The guy who stuck up 7-Eleven in order to get money for heroin, or the impaired driver that took out a car full of kids, right?
Or some kid overdosed at a dance, or somebody walked into a school and shot up the school because they were high on something, I mean, we could go on and on.
That's where we form our opinions about addiction, right? So even if we've had with other diseases.
You mean almost like it's like we're typecasting addiction? Is that what you're saying?
I think we do. And I think the stigma that many people walk around with prevents them from having open, honest conversations and diving in, right? And so I think there's a huge amount of stigma. Look, and it doesn't, I'm a cancer survivor. I can talk about the disease pretty easily. You can talk about your recovery pretty easily, but the vast majority of people in recovery don't necessarily start podcasts or talk about it with other people to the extent that some of us get out there and talk about this issue.
Well, that's the reason why I did this, because 100%. I'm trying to make this a conversation. I'm trying to bring it to reality and make it like, actually, this is fucking happening, and like it needs to be talked about, whether you like it or not.
Death. Right. It's life or death.
It is life or death.
Be uncomfortable. Be uncomfortable. This is life or death. We need to have the conversation.
You know what I find is that, sure, it's going to be uncomfortable, but after that discomfort actually comes peace
and relief
and yeah, just freedom, and it's just like anything, right? Like you have to go through the tough things. You have to go through the tough waters. You can use any fucking analogy you want to. Like you have to go through the tough shit in order to come out the other side, becoming a better version of yourself. Otherwise, how do you expect to be better? And I think, again, I'm just one person. I'm doing this first and foremost for myself, but I know that I'm showing up in ways for others that I won't know what the downstream impacts are going to be, but hopefully I'm pretty sure they'll be positive than if I had continued to use and possibly killed myself because I had liver failure, or I died of, or I got into a car accident and died, or I OD'd, those are things that you won't know, but I think it needs to be a conversation. It needs to be something that we talk about more.
So, Matt, two things I want to leave your audience with. One, parents will say to me, I'm afraid to talk to my 15-year-old kid. Suppose the conversation doesn't go right. And I'll say, imagine a conversation with a 15-year-old not going right, right? That happens all the time. It's okay. Stop
Happened
the
to me today.
and start it over, right? You could start it over again. Here's the second thing I would say. And parents always say to me, I'm not sure. I don't know if there's an issue going on. I'm not positive.
I'm scared.
As parents, one of the best assets we have are our guts and our ability to trust our gut. When something's happening, to trust our gut about what the right thing to do is. I can give you a framework and kind of tell you what not to do, but follow your heart and your gut. You get really in touch with who you are and who your family is and the relationship with your kid. That's going to give you 90% of the answers. I can only give you the technical 10%, and I can give you the resources. You have 90% of the answers that sit right in here.
Really well said. You can lead a horse to water, as they say, but you have to drink the water. And the only person that could drink the water is the horse, and you can't do anything else. This has been such a fantastic conversation, Jeff. Thank you for calling me. I'm so glad that we're connected.
Yeah, me too.
Let's go ahead and end with, by the way, I'm so glad that you are cancer free.
Me too.
Do you want to? Yeah, I'm so glad that you're cancer free. I'm glad that I'm so blown away that you're like an Iron Man and you're doing all these wonderful things. I did want to kind of mention to everybody that the FCA website is FCALI, so fcali.org, and all the resources are there. There's a little get help section. Is there anything that you want to say before we go ahead and wrap, Jeff, on anything, whether it's the FCA, whether it's your book, whether it's kind of all the other things? Is there anything that you want to say, in closing?
Yeah, quick. What I would say is if someone out there is listening and has questions, you can contact me. My information is all over the FCA website. You can find me on social media. I am more than happy to talk to you. I would much rather you do that than walk around with a whole bunch of unanswered questions. And quite frankly, if I could spend a little bit of time with you and give you peace of mind and some relief and some resources, I am more than happy to do that. Matt, as you mentioned, I'm a two-time cancer survivor, 2 cancers in 2 years. I kicked cancer's ass twice. If it comes back again, I'm going to kick it yet a third time. I believe that I and you are here for a purpose, and that purpose is to help others and to shine a light on some of the things that we tend to shy away from. Connection between cancer and addiction and mental health is, look, you have to look after yourself. You have to take care of yourself. You have to be willing to get help when you need it. And look, that's the way you create health, not only in individuals, but in families and communities. So if we could lessen some of the stigma with mental health conditions, things that happen above the neck with things that happen below the neck.
Yeah.
And then we're moving the needle. And we're getting ahead. So thank you for having me on. I am so glad that Jason Mayo connected us. He wrote a book as well. He wrote a phenomenal book about his recovery journey. Should be required reading for folks that have questions about addiction and recovery and that kind of thing. Again, thank you for having me on. Thank you for what you do on a regular basis. You're amplifying the voice of so many people, and you'll never know the downstream effects, but trust me, they're there.
Thank you so much, Jeff. And you're an amazing person. I'm so glad that we know each other now. We're going to go ahead and wrap, everybody. Again, thank you for tuning in. We actually went longer than I expected us to go to, but I'm so glad that we did. The Sober Cold Bear podcast, again, this is a resource. This is not a place that you go to get sober. There are things out there that allow you to do that. You can go to AA, you can go to rehab. It starts with the simple sentence, I need help. Ask for help. It's okay to ask for help. It's okay to not be okay. And I think the sooner that you ask for help, the sooner you get help, the better off you're going to be. But you can't do this thing alone. Go to rehab if you need to go to rehab. Go to AA meetings, get a sponsor, do the steps. Ask for help. Reach out to Jeff. Reach out to me. We're going to go to wrap. Thanks, everybody, for joining in, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Sometimes I feel like I want to fly without no wings. I elevate inside my mind, and sometimes I look inside